and welcome to Cancer Book Club. Now, today is the 18th of June, which happens to be Father's Day. So I know that most of you are in the world out there are off enjoying your fathers or being good fathers and all of that, which is great. But right today, we're going to be talking about, for about 40 minutes or so, about the book The Fault in Our Stars, and the movie as well. This is a big bestseller by John Green, came out in 2012, and it's about two young adult cancer patients who meet and fall in love and have a story. So it evokes a lot of strong responses in people of all stripes, in people who've never had cancer. Of course, it was a young adult novel, so many young people loved it. It was actually at one point listed as the biggest seller, bestseller for 2012. And it has, I think people with cancer also have a unique experience or unique response to it. And I'm assuming that young adult people with cancer would also have a strong response to it. And so I have a series of questions here to just talk about it. But because we don't have a big group today, it might be just sort of informal discussion to get us going. But so Pat, what was your, just give me your first off impression of The Fault in Our Stars.
I loved Hazel. I thought she was amazing. What a great, great character. I think one of the things she said early in the book, well, actually, I read the book a long time ago, and I watched the movie earlier today. And one of the things that she said early on that really was almost a sub-theme for the entire film was pain demands to be felt. And I love that because part of it is that rawness of youth where you see through so much of the social trappings and you see what you perceive as truth. And pain is part of that truth, particularly in cancer. And I thought that was just such a terrific, terrific thing.
I thought I responded to that line a great deal because as cancer patients, you are often get, no, don't feel that anxiety, don't feel that fear, stop feeling that way, you're killing yourself if you feel that way. And so she just kind of went to that. I think that the book did a surprisingly good job of just sort of blowing past all that and showing her insight into that and just saying, no, I'm going to feel how I feel. And there are many spots in the book where I thought it would very courageously showed, and rightly showed, that positivity and being a hero and all of that has its limits. I was particularly moved by the scene at the end, near the end, where Augustus is in the car and he's gotten out of his deathbed, basically drives to go get cigarettes so he can continue his sort of metaphor of, I'm holding these cigarettes, they don't kill me, when he is in fact actually dying. And when he gets there, he gets in medical trouble, and then he's crying and he's vomiting and he's scared, and he calls her and she comes, and her comment that I wish I could say that he kept up his courage right to the end. I wish I could say all those platitudes, but that's not what happened, and I can't say.
I like that. I loved it. I like that a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it was just very real, and I liked the realness of it very much. I think in a way that a young adult perspective allows more of that reality to come out, because as you go as an adult and you assume different roles and people look up to you, you're a mother, a father, or wife, a husband, whatever. You're not allowed the same emotional freedom, or we don't allow ourselves that emotional freedom. And that's not fair. It's just not fair.
If, in the movie, I don't remember this from the book, and perhaps you've in the movie, I remember Augustus hitting the steering wheel of the car and saying, I hate myself. I hate myself. And what he means is, I hate my body. I hate my body because it won't do. It's failing me, and it won't. I'm in pain and I'm distressed. And I've heard dozens of cancer patients say that over the time, not meaning it in the I hate myself, my soul.
Right.
But
I hate what's happening to me.
Exactly. And I felt that, but in his grief, that's his method of expression. And I remember that same kind of grief and the steer wheel pounding in the movie 50-50, where the young person faces his death on the operating table the next day, and he's saying, I never saw Canada. I never got to see Canada. And I thought, gee, that I thought that this book did sort of capture lots about pain and loss and and grief, and the through the lens of a young person. And as you say, the lens of young people who see through the platitudes, see through the posturing. For example, she mocks the social worker who leads the group in the church, and how he sort of, and in the movie that's really mocked. The guy's playing a guitar and singing sort of, "Oh, we're with you."
See, I love that scene.
Yeah.
I love that scene because support groups range enormously. Some are very good, some not so good. And I really like that scene a great deal. I don't know if you've been into any support groups that were a little, not quite what you wanted.
Well, yeah, I used to, because I live in a rural area, I used to have to attend support groups that were sort of online, so people were avatars. So because of that, they said all kinds of things because they weren't actually responsible for their utterances in a face-on way, the way we're doing now. So people said all kinds of outrageous things, and so no, I've had my range of experiences with support groups as well.
There was a lot of understatement in this too that I thought was interesting. Augustus at one point says, "I had a touch of cancer."
Yes, yeah.
And it reminded me of a story that a friend tells, and she had very, very, very dire breast cancer diagnosis. She survived, but she had about a 10% chance of living or something. And one of her friends, after she went through all this terrible treatment, had her life turned upside down in her 40s and everything she went through. One of her friends said, "So, I hear you had a bout of cancer." And it infuriated her when she heard this, rightfully so.
It's like a bout of indigestion.
Yeah. So when that comment came up, a touch of cancer, it really caught my ear.
Yes, she says that to him and that was another sort of touching, I thought was a very touching aspect of the book, is how Hazel would use sentences like that to sort of mock the trope you're talking about while talking to Gus. So when Gus confesses to her on the park bench in Amsterdam that he's lit up like a Christmas tree on his PET CT, she says, "Oh, you've just got a touch of cancer." And so it becomes they laugh together because that's such a ridiculous thing to say. But both of them have heard the ridiculous things said to them, as have all of we. So I guess that's another aspect of the book I found it really surprising that someone who, I'm presuming that John Green himself has no personal experience with cancer as a disease, but that he could actually so cleverly give voice to a patient's experience with that, but also a young person's experience with that. I just found that remarkable that, when people, "Oh, Hazel, how are you?" I said, "I'm fine." "Oh, do you mean apart from the terminal cancer?"
I know, I love that. But the other thing I think he did a really good job of capturing was the difficulty and restraint in communicating that everybody had.
Right.
Hazel's mother, she didn't want to tell her she was, going back to school to become a social worker. Hazel, not until the end, not telling her mother about her concerns for her and everything else. I think that every character in this had their own set of emotions and concerns that they kept to themselves.
They were all fragile over some.
I think a lot of it came out at the funeral.
Yes.
Yes.
And I felt that was, I thought that was also well done. And that Hazel's thoughts about being a grenade, I'm in a grenade around these fragile people. So, I was just reading the passage where she says, "I can't help bereaving you, Mom and Dad. I can't help destroying your lives because you're invested already, but I don't want to get close to anyone my own age because I'm a grenade." And yet when it turns out that Augustus is the grenade, the real grenade in the story, she doesn't respond with, "Oh my God, get out of my life, you're going to blow up, you're a grenade." She responds with all kinds of warmth and patience and kindness and true love to him. So I found that she evolves as she realizes that true love doesn't mean roses and flowers and beautiful nights having dinner in Amsterdam, although I'm sure that didn't doesn't hurt when it comes to developing true love. But that, that she stood with him as he was peeing his bed and all of these other things. And it's interesting because one of the comments on the kind of book club questions that are out there on the web about the book, they'll say, were you shocked and horrified by the talk about the body fluids? Did that upset you? Did you have to put down the book because it talked about people vomiting and putting on oxygen tubes and having these procedures done? And I've been through so many procedures. It's sort of like I can't even remember what it would be like to think.
No, I agree.
I've lost my sense. What's wrong with me? I've lost my sense that would be awful for other people to read.
Well, I know, and it's like I watch them going through the cat or PET scan or whatever, and I'm just like, I don't react that much to that because it's become such a part of my life as well. And I don't know what an outsider looking in would think of that. I thought they went they very sparingly used the medical pieces in the movie, at least.
Yes.
It was not overwhelming at all.
Yes, no, it was very lightly touched on, and just I thought it was. One moment I thought was super poignant, and I thought it was even more poignant in the movie than the book, was when they're first go to the hotel room and they're going to make love, and she's got to take off her shirt, gets tangled up in her oxygen, and he has to kind of say, well, my leg is going to look like this when you take the clothes off. You're going to see it, and it looks like that. Suddenly you are aware of how these two young people would have these terrible concerns about interacting that way, far greater than ordinary teenagers would have at a time of, I'm sure ordinary teenagers are quite sensitive at that moment, but to have it, well, I'm missing a leg or I've got this other disfigurement, those two had to kind of.
I don't think it mattered to either of them. I don't think that mattered to either of them because one, they were certainly in love with each other, but they shared this cancer journey. They shared this awareness. They shared all the issues. That I don't think there was anything that could have shocked either of them.
And that's the total acceptance they each had for the other with regard to their trajectories, right? And I just thought that was remarkable and really beautifully. I thought it was really beautifully done. And I liked her phrases about, I fell in love the way you fall asleep, you start, and then all at once. And I thought that there was some really quite beautiful literate sentences in there that I found really, really striking. One of the questions that is asked about with this book it mentions, I didn't know this, but John Green himself worked as a chaplain. Green once served as a chaplain in a children's hospital, working with young cancer patients. In an interview, he referred to the hero's journey within illness, that, in spite of it, you pull yourself up and continue to be alive while you're alive. So the question is, in what way does Green's comment apply to this book about two young people who are dying? Is theirs a hero's journey? Is the pull yourself up phrase an unseemly statement by someone like the author or any reader who is not facing a terminal disease?
No, I think that's a very real comment. And obviously he's referring to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey as part of this process. And I think that if you look at the film, when they visit Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam,
yes,
and she has to go up that ladder, and it's so difficult. She almost can't make it. And anybody who's been through cancer treatment knows exactly what she's feeling.
Yes.
And she's just hanging there like, I can't do it, but I can do it, but I will do it. And I thought that was just an incredible scene. And I don't think, going back to your question, I think that's the reality of it. I think you don't have a choice. You have to pull yourself through some very difficult things. It's nothing to do with being a hero. On the outside looking in, that may be a way to categorize it. But when you're living it, you're just doing the best you can.
And getting back to Anne Frank's house, that's Anne Frank being another metaphoric and real person who really truly, who was an embodiment in many ways of I'll keep hoping, but I'll die, and I will die horribly. due to human evil, and that is how Anne Frank died. She died, but we still think of Anne as heroic and wonderful, despite how she died. And that's the way I feel about Augustus in the story. I think that Hazel, whose death we don't see, but that the idea that these people are facing this really sad and really terrible ending is the same way we feel when we read about Anne Frank. We think of Anne not. I don't think of Anne Frank as a hero, although that's ultimately, I guess, what she was, because she kept on hoping and creating and going forward in life despite the horrendous conditions under which she lived and died. So I guess were I them and were I in Anne Frank's house, that's the kind of thoughts that would be going through my mind, that, many of us, it isn't just cancer that results in horrible human deaths that should not have happened.
The point of death is an interesting one you make, because most deaths really aren't very pretty. But part of it goes to our cultural conditioning. And I don't want to get off on a religious tangent or anything like that, but because we see death as an end, an absolute end, we phrase so much of our literature and our thought process and our emotions around that. If we saw that as more of a continuum, the stories might shift and change.
So it'd be more of a transformational moment as opposed to that. I guess in response to that, I partly think, well, there's still the suffering part, regardless of what happens at an actual moment of death to us. There's the physical suffering that precedes it, at least with cancer. And I felt that
physical
was tenderly
and emotional, emotional suffering.
Exactly, and I thought it was tenderly and just the right amount of discretion applied to Gus's death in the book. But I was really glad that I was worried when I first picked up this book that it would be glamorize and just trivialize young adult cancer. Well, they're handsome, great-looking people, and they're having a great time. Oh, and then they die.
Yeah.
but it really did sort of emphasize that there was pain in his and humiliation in his descent, and that he needed support from his loved ones, and that they were able to keep joking about it, and even at the end where she's saying, "Oh, you've got such a hot body," and all that kind of stuff, while he's out in the backyard in his wheelchair and so on. So I thought,
well, I also like the way that the story was left unfinished.
yes,
I thought that was a very nice touch, because you really didn't know until close to the end who would be the first one to pass. And she makes a comment at the funeral that the funerals are for the living, not for the dead. How very true. But I think that by leaving it unfinished, it showed a great deal of care and thought, and it lets her character live on for a bit, at least live on in your mind, because you don't have to go to the end with her.
What was your response to the Van Houten character?
Oh, that was a real interesting curveball, wasn't it? I think my response at the end, particularly after he showed up at the funeral and she found out, that he had been corresponding with Gus. He was somebody who was in enormous pain as a result of his child. He couldn't face the pain, which is why he descended into alcoholism. And it was a broken life, an absolute broken life. And when I look at that, and then I contrast it with her mother, who is trying to already make plans to move on and do something positive, I thought it was a very interesting contrast in how people handle terrible circumstances.
That's a really great insight. Until this moment, I hadn't really thought about the mother and Van Houten being a foil for each other, and with her being, as you say, ready to sort of transfigure her experience into something, and him, even though he had creative talent, unable to do that. And as you know, he writes that book, An Imperial Affliction, and that's not finished either. He stops it, and then there is no ending to the book. What did you think about Anna's desperation to know what happened at the end of An Imperial Affliction? What do you think that meant?
Interesting question. Part of it can just be being emotionally involved in any story. I mean, think about a story that moves in sequels, the trilogy, anything, Tolkien's trilogy, anything
Game of
else.
Thrones.
Yeah, right. I mean, you want to know. You want to know what's going to happen. You're just involved in it. But I think that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. The lack of ending, or the lack of it isn't a lack of ending as much as it is there. It's a lack of definition.
Well, it's like Hazel was like, what happens to the mother? What happens to the mother? What happens
Yeah.
to the mother? She's very, insistent on finding out what happens to the adults who survive the character who dies in Van Houten's book. So I didn't really think about it until later. I thought, could it have been her need to know that is part of her own. I want to know that my parents are going to be okay, which is something she craves and she
And
wants,
and it goes
understandably.
back and it goes back to her definition of herself as a grenade.
Mm-hmm.
Will people survive
Well, people, yeah,
the
exactly.
situation? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I get past that. Yeah, and so that was so many. It seemed like there were so many. That's why I thought the book was, as I say, surprisingly well written, because I've read quite a lot of young adult books. I read the Twilight series, and and I've read, many young adult books are written in a trivial fashion. They trivialize. I personally found the Divergent series that way, just sort of patronizing to young people and very predictable. Like, oh, come on, she's going out into the dark with a flashlight because she doesn't want to get her friends. And oh, come on, like I lose patience with young adult fiction all the time. Now, there are some standout exceptions, like The Hunger Games. As you know, I love that series and feel that is true literature. But I also thought this book was literature and not just a young adult book, because of how carefully crafted some of these aspects are, like the foil between her life and the character Anna in the book that she reads, and the many points of contrast between herself and Gus. And I just thought that there were a lot of ways in which they really approached those bigger sort of metaphorical questions, not in a smarmy way. Like, and what
Yeah.
I liked the most about it is that Hazel mocked those
Yes.
things. And she and Isaac in the support group, when the platitudes would come out, they'd go, and how in her mind she would say, "Oh come on," like, "Oh come on," and I just loved that irreverence that she had, which I thought was, I found it soothing and rewarding and pleasing to think, yeah, I'm not the only person who has those kinds of snarky thoughts about.
Well, I thought it was a breath of fresh air, because I
Yes.
think there was an emotional realness, vulnerability, and facing up to what was happening on Hazel's part and on Gus's. And I think that they elicited more truth from the adults around them, by virtue of the fact that they were facing things. Sometimes they faced it with humor. Sometimes they faced it in different ways. But they really weren't running from this terrible situation.
Yeah, and I also thought that the portrayal of their exploration into some of the sort of pleasures of adult life, like going out for dinner in Amsterdam, I thought that was really nicely done too. Like, they're not, oh, we got really loaded, man. It
Yeah.
wasn't trivializing them as, oh yeah, that's all young people care about is getting wasted. It was like, no, we really loved eating this risotto. We really like that, and the champagne was nice, but we shouldn't have any more because we want to keep enjoying the risotto. Like, they treated that whole evening really tenderly, and I thought it was well done. And they don't end that night with a big orgy. They end that night talking on the bench outside about his previous girlfriend who had the brain tumor, who'd become really, really aggressive as she died. And so that was also I just thought it was just surprising. It surprised me. He just kept on surprising me by being real instead of falling into the kind of young adult fiction, which is, yeah, they went off, they got loaded, and then they had a whole bunch of sex and wasn't that great. Like that, he didn't pander to the lowest common denominator when writing this book, which I found really refreshing.
Yeah, and I don't Well, that is the way a lot of things are portrayed. One of the things I really liked about this book is nobody there. One of the things I really liked, it wasn't overly upbeat, but it wasn't down. It was very neutral almost in that regard. Um, but there was an element of enjoying the moment that came up again and again. I thought that was very valuable. I just had a thought. It's kind of floating through my brain and I'm losing it. Bear with me a second. You were talking about the adult nature of their behavior.
Well, that they were they were exploring adult type experiences like airplane travel, like things that adults take for granted, but they as young people were like, wow. And so I thought that was.
I thought it was very well done in that regard. That my thought has escaped me, but it'll pop up, and when it does, I'll wave my hand, and interrupt you. I'm not sure that it's that pithy or that valuable, but I'll see if I can regain that.
I found the book was just filled with little sort of charming insights. It all throughout. There was like moments of humor, there was moments of wisdom, there was moments of surprise, and so I kept on having unique experiences myself while I was reading it, and and it went in great and interesting directions. I remember feeling in the scene when they first meet Dan Van Houten and Van Houten's getting drunker and drunker, and he's getting more and more belligerent and abusive to them. And I remember feeling like I remember as a reader feeling anxiety with these two young people in a strange country with a strange drunk who's going on and on. Like, it must have been as scary as hell. And yet they don't really elaborate on how afraid they are. It's just, I was very nervous for them as a reader because I wasn't expecting that, and I was quite taken by the ride of it. Like, how awful would that be?
But I love the way Hazel processed it. She processed it by drawing a line in the sand and saying no thanks.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of anger there, yes, but I think she processed it really well. And she had every right to be angry.
Oh, yes.
Totally inappropriate. And she went into it maybe a little naively, looking at, I want to have the answer to what happens in this book. But she walked away in a very adult fashion, recognizing that this isn't where she should spend her energy.
And in that scene where he calls her what does he call her? Something really, really awful, like your
terrible.
failed experiment in mutation or something
like
it was
that. Horrible, yeah.
And she smacks the drink out of his hand or whatever, and she says, there's nothing you can say to me about my disease. There's no words you can say to me that's scarier than what I've already been through. There's I guess it was at that moment, it seemed to me that her experiences of cancer had been so huge that no amount of social anxiety was going to throw her after she's been through what she's been through.
That holds true, I think, across the age spectrum. After a point, you've been through so much with this, emotionally, spiritually, physically, just everything, and the roller coaster. It's like, there's not that much that really matters. And the other stuff just it can become downright comical. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Comedy is a great way to handle the nonsense that one often has to deal with.
Yeah, I guess I totally.
I love Hazel. She was just a terrific character.
Yes, and when I first met her, we first meet her in the beginning of the book. She's sort of coasting. She's sort of withdrawn. She's retreating. Mm-hmm. She's getting treatment for depression and so on. And she's saying, "I'm not depressed. I'm facing miserable reality, which is I'm 17, I guess, and not going to make it. And I know I'm not going to make it, and I've always known I'm not going to make it, and it's just a question of when." And so her sort of, I won't say snarky, but her laconic is the word. I don't know what it is. Her attitude, which is sort of
she has a great sense of
black humor around it.
That's sideways humor. I mean, the comments she made about all the pills she had to take so many times a day, it was hysterical. And she made, I don't remember now, maybe you'll remember, Robin, she made a comment about, just prescribe me more drugs or something.
Yes, around the depression. I don't want to go to the sport room, just give me more drugs. Yeah, and what was your thought about the Isaac character? What do you think his role or dimension in the book was?
Isaac, refresh my memory.
He was the one who was blind, who became blind.
Oh, yes, forgive me, Isaac, yeah. I'm not sure. I think one of the things with Isaac was certainly the betrayal, social betrayal, that almost everybody experiences with cancer.
Right.
People just dump you and leave you.
Mm.
And I haven't really thought about how the blindness plays into the overall storyline, but it certainly does. The loss of sight and the having everything go so dark, and yet he doesn't really go to that dark a place. He maintains his sense of humor, particularly when it comes to egg throwing. That was a great scene. Turn a little more left, throw left. And then when the mother came out of the house, that was a fantastic scene.
Oh, wasn't it hilarious?
So we have 2 lungs, 4 eyes,
Yeah, that's right.
5 legs, whatever. That was hysterical.
Oh man, yeah. Usually when characters are blinded in books, it has something to do with lack of insight, is some sort of metaphor for that. But I don't know that it did. I can't quite get my my metaphorical fingers
Yeah.
on that one. With that character, Isaac showed full tilt rage over his disability and disfigurement that was coming to him because of cancer, and that I also thought was great. And I liked that Gus was like, "Hey, break all my trophies, go ahead."
Yeah.
He totally understood that that's what his friend needed to do. But I guess in there, that Isaac is the young adult who lives or who will live despite being blinded. The message it seemed to be in the book was that his cancer was in some sense cured by the loss of both eyes. Because there's that scene he tells in which, or at the funeral, where he tells about Gus kind of bursting in on him as he's lying there with his eyes gone, saying to him, "You're going to have a wonderful. I've got great news. I've got great news. The great news is that you will go on every day and have wonderful experiences." Because Gus must have at that point known that he himself
Yes.
would not.
Gus knew long before he told anybody, which I thought was interesting too.
I read the book. And I didn't know about Gus. And when Gus tells about his diagnosis, I'm just floored. And then I go back over those scenes, and I think, though, he went through the dinner knowing. He went on the airplane knowing. He went on all of these experiences, and there wasn't a lot of foreshadowing about his disclosure. There was a little bit of, "Oh, I can't catch my breath in this elevator," but there wasn't. It was, and when looking at it again, I think, "Gosh, Gus, what it must have taken for him to give away his wish, to get on the plane, to go to this Amsterdam, to go through these really enjoyable experiences of the dinner and so forth, and to go through the Van Houten experience, and then and still not tell her. What was that like for him? How did he see all these events?"
I think that was his gift to her.
It was.
He was not going to be the grenade. And nothing he could say, he was wise. There was nothing he could say or do that was going to change his course or his outcome. And I think he really wanted, I at least saw this as a great gift to Hazel, that she got to have all these experiences and experiences with him.
Why do you think he told her when he did?
It was almost inevitable at that point. I mean, he was not well. He wasn't going to be around a long time.
He tells her at the end of the trip, and he doesn't tell her when they get back to the States, and he doesn't tell her before they leave. He tells her, was it after Anne Frank's? Was they leave the Anne Frank's is when he...
Yes, it was after they were sitting on the bench, the canal, or outside of the house. Yes. Interesting. I'm not sure. Maybe he had an innate sense that this would make this trip more poignant in some way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or maybe the rawness of the Anne Frank's experience was something that he just said, some things are total, and it's time to just be entirely honest.
And he'd held it in for a very long time. So I don't know. I think maybe there was a degree of honesty, because that's when they got together and they made love the first time on the trip, right? If I remember properly. So maybe it was just this growing intimacy that the two had, that he felt it was time to share that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also at that point, we don't know if Hazel, we're thinking Hazel's going to be the first to go. You can tell her lungs are filling with fluid again. She's having trouble breathing. She had so much trouble getting up the stairs. You see all that. And how do you hold back on something so incredible and personal when you don't know if she's going to be there in a week or 2 or 3?
And I have to think about that more. I need to think more about his character and his decisions and and how that worked, because I just thought that was such a selfless thing for him to have done, to have kept such a dreadful piece of news to himself and to Isaac. He kept it from Isaac too. Isaac didn't know either. So
I don't think it was selfless. I think I mean selfish. I think it was selfless,
that's what I
possibly.
mean,
But
selfless. Yeah, it
I
was a
think maybe,
selfless thing.
yeah, selfless. Yeah, I agree. But also, I think that maybe he is processing it internally.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe maybe that gives more insight too, because it would be so. If they're true to being young people or any people, that news like that takes a long time to kind of reach the brain and be fully uh, grasped. And so he perhaps hadn't fully grasped it himself, because he was caught up in the adventure of the trip and so forth. And it was only as
Well,
it was
and he
ebbing
was
that he
thinking
realized.
after his amputation, he had a good chance of being alive,
Yeah, 80
good
was it
chance of living.
85 or whatever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then he got slammed with this. Um, it dragged him back in time, dragged him back to the original diagnosis, dragged him back to all those terrible and difficult emotions. And he's dealing with it with Grace, where he's watching her really die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that there's a processing that had to go on. And also, it was a gift to Grace. I don't think he wanted to ruin that for her. It's a good
Um,
question.
the other thing that I do not I sort of experienced this at myself as a cancer patient. My parents were alive when I was first diagnosed, and I was thinking, oh geez, I really hope I can hang on until they've passed on, and which I did. They both died a number of years ago. So now, should I pass on, that they will. At least I didn't. If you were a young adult person who probably won't outlive your parents, the thought process around that is something that I had a sort of passing acquaintance with, but not a huge familiarity with. So that was for me educational, in reading about her thoughts, her constant thoughts about, and when Gus takes his parents to go find his gravesite, and then he ultimately does need that gravesite, and then she watches her parents with his parents relating and thinking, my parents are going to have a moment like that too.
And
And
when she gives the eulogy, she doesn't give the eulogy she wrote. She gave the eulogy that was appropriate and needed in the circumstance. And I thought that was a major she really stepped up to the plate, I think, in that instance, which had to be very hard. And she kept looking at Gus's mother and seeing the pain and seeing the hurt. And know this was coming for her. This was coming to her family too.
yes, yeah, and I wondered about that at the time. I wondered, if she was going to, maybe the eulogy that she gave to Gus himself, was so personal and intimate. You could never possibly give that to in front of a bunch
Yeah.
of people. But one of the things that happens in the book is that she and Gus sort of semi-mock the encouragements that are on the wall of Gus's parents' house. Like, I can't remember what the encouragements are, but
Yeah.
the angels are here to pick up. They're just sweet little utterances and sayings, and they kind of make fun of them. But in the end, when it's time for the eulogy, those are what she talks about. You can't have what is it? What was it? Was something, you can't have the sun without the rain, or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
Something along
really
those lines. Yeah.
superficial thing, and she managed to seize upon that and use it as the fulcrum for the eulogy she does deliver. And you're right, that strikes me, that she kind of, how she really remained a teenager but grew up in those moments to say, I've got to use these encouragements because they are part of the fabric of this family's life, and I am going to honor them and respect them and turn them
And
into
then, as she
something.
said after that, funerals are for the living, not for
Yeah,
the dead.
yeah, yeah, and that's so true.
Yes.
Yeah, but the whole thing about Gus getting his own eulogy from Isaac and Hazel before his death, that's us adult cancer patients, young people, it doesn't matter.
Actually, that's a
You,
great idea. You know
you,
that?
well, you end up kind of hearing it anyway. I don't know if you experienced this when you were first diagnosed, but people are like, "Oh, I heard your news, and I just want to know. I really appreciated those years of working back in the '60s." Like, I'm sick, you're gonna die. Like tomorrow, they give you your own eulogy. before you did. Well, thank you. I guess I got to hear it in advance. So there's a funny scene like that in 50/50 too. We might want to do that movie one time. On Cancer Book Club is another, yeah, it's a little older adult, but not a teenage, but a young adult still. And what is it like?
Overall, this was just a great book pick. I mean, I watched the movie this time, but I thought this was just a terrific pick. And I walked away with this with a very different feeling than I had when I first picked up the book. When I first picked up the book, I had trouble getting through it. I think I mentioned that to you. And in watching the movie this earlier today, I was really taken with it. I was really taken with the characters. It was long. It was 2 hours. I mean, it was a long movie. And from a storyline point, there were some things that I think that maybe they could have shortened up and cleaned up, but it would have been trite. And I think actually keeping the length was probably a good thing.
Yeah, that's my great, that I think you've hit the words exactly there, Pat. It wasn't trite. And I had expected a trite book, and it wasn't trite.
Yeah.
And so many books are trite. And I was very, very pleased to be able to read something that had a realness to it. And I was quite surprised that someone who has not himself experienced those kinds of emotions could empathize well enough with dying people generally, that he could imagine what some of those experiences and ideas would be like, particularly through the lens of a young girl. You think he's male himself, right? So I just thought it
But
was very
as a chaplain, he probably saw a lot too. He saw a lot in the families. He saw a lot through the eyes of other people. So I think his experiences as a chaplain were helpful.
might be interesting at some point. I'm sure it's all out on YouTube or someplace. There's probably points where he's interviewed and he describes all that. But I guess I think what's good about Cancer Book Club is that we're talking about it from the experiences of people who can empathize with those characters in a unique way, in a different way than ordinary readers would read that. I kind of wonder if ordinary readers would read a book like this and go, life is precious and I need to enjoy the risotto I'm going to have for dinner tonight. And I get that message too, but I might read it a bit more with, I just feel like that it gave a bit of grace to these experiences, even though it described them graphically, that it just treated the idea of cancer and the struggles of it and death with a dignity that I was very impressed, very, very impressed that he was able to generate.
Yeah, I would urge anybody looking for a good cancer book. This is a good read.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that from a young adult perspective, there will be things you like or don't like, but I think there's going to be more that you really connect with and you empathize with.
It might be, I'm hoping that, and as people, hopefully young adults will watch this discussion, and if they have things they want to say, they might add it on the Cancer Club comment opportunities that they have on the replay, because that's what you and I are both missing, is the being young, very young, at the time of diagnosis. But so we share things in common with them. But I just think I would be very interested to know how a young cancer survivor would, or a young person living with cancer experiences a book like this. So it's 5:44 now, so that kind of takes us to the usual span of our club. So Cancer Book Club is going to be taking a break, as we know, for July and August, and so we'll both be off having adventures and
follow me on treatments
and all that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to avoid the treatment part.
Yeah. Anyway, but this idea of talking about something you can also watch as well as read has been good. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, our next thing is to watching the scenes from the movie or the series, The Big C. Is that next?
No, I think our next book club, I think, is in September, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Oh, it's not. No, it's not. No, I can't. I don't think it's mine.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. No, mine would have to be October. I don't think I could do it.
Okay. We may need to rearrange the schedule a little bit. But are we looking at the Big C, perhaps?
That's what I thought it was. I thought we were looking at Laura Linney doing the Big C, and that we would sort of ease into club again, and that we'd start with. Let's
do that. The Big C, as many of you know, stars Laura Linney, and it's a comedy about cancer. It's hysterical, actually.
Good, good.
Very funny, very insightful. And what we thought we would do would be watch the first 3 episodes of The Big C. It's available on Amazon, and talk about that. There, in a way, I wish we could do more episodes because there's so many wonderful and poignant and funny things that happen. But I think the first 3 episodes give us a real flavor of some of the characters and some of the issues and dilemmas they're facing.
Yes, I thought it's my memory now that we chose that because we knew people would want to kind of prepare for the book club over the summer months, and we didn't want them to do it to be too onerous or too heavy. So that's why it's not an actual, it's not a book so per se as just as the series. And I've downloaded it. I've got it right here, and really keen to take that. Again, I think I'll come at it with totally new lens than I might have had I not be in my situation that I'm in now. So, okay, well, I had a great time. This was a great discussion. I could talk about books. I could talk
Me
about
too.
this book and all books all day.
I love Cancer Book Club. I'm so grateful we connected on this because I really enjoy the process of reading the cancer literature and hearing different things that people have to say about it. I always walk away thinking about things, learning things with greater, perhaps a greater perspective or more empathy in some ways. I love exploring cancer through literature and film. I think it's a very interesting way to go.
It's edifying. It's edifying,
Yes.
and I know it's edifying for people who don't have cancer too. But for those of us who do or who have, it's I just find sort of like Paul Kalanithi says in his book. When
Breath Becomes Air. Yeah.
He says, books became the lenses through which I saw my life and my experience. And I've always done that my whole life, no matter what book I was reading. But now with these bigger, heavy duty issues, it's more heavy duty issues. It's really a pleasure to do that and to interact with people who feel likewise. So.
Well, have a wonderful summer. We'll see everybody in September, the third Sunday of the month. And enjoy the summer, everyone.
Bye for now.